That doesn't count, communist. Are you really half Cuban?
Cubana. She's not even Cuban. It's Cubano.
And my uncle is very famous.
Infamous.
Very famous.
Yeah.
He was in prison like Castro for 30 years.
Good morning.
Good for him.
Welcome to the meeting of the Tulare County Board of Supervisors Strategic Financing Ad Hoc Committee. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We're going to get this meeting started with the public comments portion of the meeting. Is there anybody here wishing to speak under public comment? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public comment period and continue on with our agenda. Item number 2 on the agenda is a report on the proposed revisions to the Tulare County debt policies. Jeff.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this morning about the county's debt policies and some proposed revisions. These are prompted by a bill that went into effect earlier this year, SB 1029. Can you hear? Am I coming across okay?
No, the quieter the better.
Well, and speaking into the microphone is always helpful.
All right. Whoa.
We could dim the lights, turn them.
Hey Jeff, we
completely
can
off.
strategically set this up to where John Hess presents after you, and then you can see what he has to do to the podium, being 6'7". Just saying.
Well, I'm going to come back as John Hess in the next life if I have a choice. So. SB 1029 added some requirements for our debt policies. Specifically, there's some reporting requirements that have been grafted onto the existing statute. And what the state wants us to do is when we report that we're going to issue debt is to tell the state that, yes, we have debt policies and that the debt that we're issuing is consistent with those policies. So given your discussions that you've been having regarding pension obligation bonds, we took a look at the existing policies and discovered that there were some things in the existing policies that in effect said you were not at all interested in issuing pension obligation bonds, really kind of discouraged that. So obviously if you're going to issue pension obligation bonds, the policies need to reflect that you're at least open to that possibility. So that's what the amendments that I've redlined for you are designed to do. We can go through those if you want, or if you have questions about them, whatever the committee's convenience.
What would you like to do? What is the pleasure of this committee?
I would not like to go through them line by line.
Maybe not line by line, Jeff. Just a cursory overview would be great.
All right. The gist of it is on page 4, and again, it's a discussion about the county considering the issuance of pension obligation bonds, what those are, some of the considerations that typically an issuer would look at in terms of the whether to issue, how much to issue, and so on. So those are, again, some policy statements, but they're consistent with really the thinking, I think, in the market, the thinking that we've seen in other counties in their debt policies that I looked at around this issue. So,
Jeff, as far as this is kind of related to POBs as per this committee, but we as a board also approved going through the process of seeking a Krebs loan for energy generation for solar in particular. Would that fall under these requirements as well?
Yes, there are catch-alls. For example, on page 5, you have a list of the kinds of long-term debt you would consider, and
be under other loans.
Yeah, the Krebs falls in there, so I think you're good with that.
And then who would be which department would be responsible for doing the annual reports?
Right now, the Auditor Controller's Office is has been designated as the disclosure department for the county, so unless you want to make some kind of change in that, then I would assume it would continue to be the auditor controller.
Very good.
Would county council like to be the disclosure department? Okay. All right, great. Anything further that you want to go over, Jeff, on this?
Some questions were asked about the mechanics of issuing pension obligation bonds, and so I wanted to just give you some information about that quickly. The process will take probably 90 to 120 days from the time that you give the team the go-ahead to proceed. The team will need some direction from the board, presumably with advice from your financial advisor and your bond counsel on a couple of issues. One is how much. As you know, you have an unfunded liability, something in the area of $230, $40 million, thereabouts. I think that was the information that you've been given. So how much of that you want to try to pay down? Question about the term, how long the loan will be. It appears that there's some question about that, but it appears that you may be limited to just the 18 years that's remaining on the existing payoff arrangement, because under the law these bonds are authorized to be issued to refund that debt. In other words, you already have that debt. You can refund or refinance that, but it can't be for a longer term than the debt itself. So that's where that comes from. We'll need some direction as to whether you intend to sell the bonds competitively, seek bids from a variety of underwriters, or if you're going to do a negotiated sale, that is by selecting a underwriter who will be the exclusive underwriter for the bonds. So we'll need that information, and then we'll need to determine whether or not we have to do what's called a validation action. That is whether we have to go into court to have a court order saying that this is okay or not. So that's been typically done. Our bond counsel has said that they don't need that at this point. They're comfortable moving forward without that, but that some underwriters may need that for their own comfort in terms of marketing the bonds. So we'll need some direction around all those issues. Once we've gotten that direction, the documents will be drafted, brought back to the board for adoption, and then the sale will proceed. So again, 90 to 120 days once we get that direction, probably we'll do it.
Before it comes before the full board for formal action.
No, that's after we, well, no, that includes the board's action. But we'll come back to the board after we get that direction. So really it'll take at least 2 trips to the board to kind of get this put to bed.
And those might be long trips if it happens during the evening meeting in Porterville that we have in November. Just saying.
We can only hope.
That could be a long trip. Any comments you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you, committee members. First, an observation. I think it would be prudent that before the board as a whole would take any action, if it desired to do so, to adopt the bonds, that we get information from Tulare in terms of what would be the effect of the proposed issuance on valuation, so the board has a good idea beforehand rather than afterhand what effect it's going to have on the UAL, because it wouldn't be prudent if, let's say, the board adopted a sizable bond issue to have a marginal or negligible effect on the UAL. So working with Tulare, I think that's important. The second one is a question for council. You're suggesting that the Board of Supervisors adopt these policies before action is taken on a POB, correct?
Yes, I would suggest that.
Therefore, it's suggested that maybe this matter move to the board within a reasonable period of time before the end of the year to consider and possibly adopt the policies.
I would even say sooner. I mean, I think that now that this committee's looked at these debt policy issues, I would say that we can bring this to the board at the soonest possible date. So we don't need to take any drastic action, adding addendum or anything to an upcoming meeting, but let's just get it calendared and have it come before the board.
So that would be council to take the lead on that?
Sure.
Yeah, we can have that ready to go, as soon as the board wants to consider it. So.
Very good, thank you.
Okay. Is that?
Yeah, that's fine. I
reasonable?
think based on the discussion, I think that I'm very comfortable with moving forward with the policy, understanding that I think based on the last ad hoc committee meeting, Sarah said that they would be ready with better numbers after their November meeting. So knowing that we still have to refine scope and verify that the full board is okay with this action.
And I would also add, too, that this doesn't lock us into anything by moving these policies forward. I mean, I don't want to be hamstrung into absolutely having to issue POBs once we adopt the policy, but allowing for that to happen, I think is prudent.
That's exactly right. It would still be permissive up to the board by separate action to authorize the issuance of the bonds.
Great. Well, thank you for the presentation, Jeff. Good job. I appreciate your work on this.
You're welcome.
Any public comments or questions about this? Okay, seeing none, we will continue on to our agenda to take up item number 3, which is a report on the Tulare County Fire Department 5-year strategic financing plan. Fire Chief, responses to committee questions.
Okay. Good morning.
This is your time. I was really excited about the presentation. I was also going to ask you, are you going to be going to Pixley tonight?
I am.
All right, great. I might need you to help fill in for me. I found out I have my niece's first birthday tonight, too.
And so it starts.
But we'll figure it out.
Good morning, committee members. As with the key to everything, I will try and add some brevity to this. I trust you've all had an opportunity to look at your packages, so I just kind of wanted to briefly touch on what we did after the last meeting. Basically, here's our response data for the county. The red spots indicate the population or the call volume around our populous areas, with the number ones being Cutler, Rosie, Ivanhoe, Strathmore, and the Pixley area. As we worked through that and trying to put the whole thing together with our heat response map, our heat indexes, this looked at moving forward with a 2.0 staffing model with the best allocated resources based on what we have for mutual aid contracts, automatic aid contracts, and our best deployment of resources. That kind of gives you a thumbnail sketch of what we're doing. And again, our heat indicators, the red marks, as you look to these, most of the blank areas are SRA and FRA response lands to where we're coming in as assisting, but it's not our initial attack area with the exception of some structural protection responsibilities. As you look through response statistics, dividing up long-term into a 4-battalion process would divide up a battalion 1. Everything else is pretty equally distributed. As we look through this fiscal year 16-17, we added 2.0 staffing at the Tarabella Station, which gave us pretty good strategic management of resources for second and initial attack areas. The station in 17-18 in South Tulare, that will also give us a better deployment model. And these 3 positions that were added in 16-17 were given to us. The 17-18 3 FAEs, we did do some reduction. We eliminated a couple of warehouse positions as well as a receptionist in the front office. So trying to make a good faith effort to lean things out before we move forward and ask for more resources. Our staffing map, this indicates our largest initial attack areas with each district represented. So we've got a fair resource allocation with any type of high hazard potential. Supervisor Ennis asked a question yesterday about a ladder deployment in the truck. Yes, they're used on fires. Yes, they're used on large commercial, but the rescue potential out there that makes the most sense for only having 2 county resource ladders in the county. That is the best use of our resources. And as I look at progressing through the 2.0 staffing model, you look to the northwest and you think, okay, there's a significant call volume there. We do have automatic aid with the city of Kingsburg coming into our incident, so we filled that gap. As well as Ivanhoe area, we do have some auto aid from city of Visalia, and as we move forward with our station relocations, those will help fill in some of our gaps. Looking at the future deployment of those, the recommended, being that I know we can't all do this at once, and being a 5-year push for all these resource requests and extreme increase in our budget, our best allocation would be Cutler-Rosie first, followed by Pixley, followed by Strathmore, followed by Ivanhoe. This would give us 2.0 staffing at the majority of our initial attack areas in our primary high call volume area, coupled with the fact of what our extra help retention is and being able to put the most resources on scene in a timely manner. Extra help. Our volunteer firefighters do a great deal for our organization. They're the backbone of our organization. But as talked about before in some of the U.S. labor studies, we're not having the volunteerism that we did in the 80s and even the early 90s. Here's some retention rates of what we have. And based on the training requirements, having the culture of people coming in, wanting to be career firefighters versus serving their communities. Sure, we do have some long-tenured staff that do this, several people in the Exeter area, several people in the Pixley area, but it's just not what it used to be in the 80s and 90s. People are wanting careers less than the community involvement. And I was asked to break down into capital costs, one-time cost versus ongoing personnel cost. And this is kind of a breakdown, as you read. Our capital cost for the $20 million is $14,170. The operational costs ongoing would be 7.6. And that equates to about $3.8 million for equipment, and about $3.8 million, 762 annually for equipment, 773 annually for personnel, which would be ongoing. At the end of the 5-year period, the hose, some of the personal protective equipment, the extrication equipment would probably have a 15 to 20-year life on it, depending on the changes in technology. The personal protective equipment, the hose, the nozzles, the day-to-day things, that's going to be an ongoing cost. So at the end of 5 years, this would be defrayed somewhat, depending on what the CPI does and how far into the future we're looking. Looking at savings, building and maintenance for the new headquarters, we're looking at a $9,800 increase in cost, and ground maintenance approximately $2,800. With us not paying rent in Farmersville anymore, we'd look at a decrease in cost of about $109,000, so a total variance of about $97,000 per year. So a $291,000 savings over 3 years, $485 over 5 years, and $679 over 7 years. And there may be some hidden costs that we're unaware of, but that's our best estimate at this point. Responses. I was asked to look at fire protection districts, some agency contracts, and some county-owned properties for future relocations. Fire protection districts are, there's a lot of pros and cons. The biggest con would be getting all the elected officials and political bodies to buy in on the concept of having a large fire department, depending on if we wanted to allocate Tulare County Fire Protection District. We could do this with combined agencies. Say we had some contracts with smaller cities and municipalities that we dispatch for. That would also be an option, but there would have to be some extensive study on that. We could do it, but it's would have to take place, and usually the union issues in this day and age are pretty extensive, and but if it's the common good and it mutually benefits all, it could be something that we would definitely study. Agency contracts. Currently, I was contacted by the city of Lindsay. We're putting together a contract spec for them that we will have everyone review. Could be a pretty good use of resources. concern with, not to get down into the grassroots, but they've been under the auspices of a police department public safety model, so I know some of the long-term target hazards, hydrant systems. There are some serious concerns from a long-term maintenance standpoint. County-owned properties, talked with Mr. Newby on that, and he is still in the process of looking for something in the Poplar area. We were looking for something also in the 184 Pratt area. There are no county-owned properties. There are county-owned properties in Delft Colony, next to the water treatment plant. Really out of pocket for what we're trying to do. Something in the northern area, about 368 Road 80 would probably be the best relocation for Station 3 based on response data. But looking at that, we could do something north of the Bob Wiley detention facility that would put us a little out of pocket as the urban growth boundary went southward from Dinuba. That would be an estimate for us. How's that for 7 minutes? I know you'll have a lot of follow-up questions. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. I'd look for some future discussion and direction on this. I know it's very daunting. We're not asking for 4.0 staffing, but if we could continue moving to a 2.0 staffing model, I think we're making a good faith effort. Mr. Coyne, Mr. Hess have been excellent trying to work through the CDBG process to refurbish a barn in Early Mart, as well as buy some new apparatus. So I think the good faith efforts are there for us trying to get the best bang for our buck. So
a couple questions that I have. One is operational. Question/comment. I like the phase-in approach of the 2.0 staffing, but are we ever going to get to a point where you're going to need a 2.0 staffing model in Alpaw or in some of the more isolated areas where there is not a huge call volume to support that? So this plan, this phase-in plan, shows that pretty much by 2023, you're planning to basically have 2.0 staffing countywide. Is that correct?
yes, that would be the ultimate goal.
I know that's the ideal situation, but I think that what you're doing here in targeting the highest call volumed areas with the 2.0 staffing is a very prudent way to go, and I'm definitely on board with helping you to figure out how to make that happen for sure. On an equipment side, I know we're talking about relocating stations in Dinuba and Tulare and possibly even in Porterville at some point. Where's the conversation going, or where has it been with those cities? Has there been any progress, would you say, in any of those cases?
There is not. It has been a theory at this point.
Okay.
Moving it south from Dinuba, we would enter into this conversation how would it affect automatic mutual aid, but with the location of Station 4 in Cutler-Orosi, we do have a good faith effort. It would extend the response time to the east side maybe 4 to 5 minutes. Porterville area, it's that area on West Olive is completely engulfed by city development. The only wild card in that would be the casino relocation, moving that to Poplar. So there would be some, for lack of a better term, political volatility maybe associated with that. So.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Any comments on COPs?
I appreciate this, and I think that it's important to know that, or to discuss that even though there's lower call volumes at some of the stations, that 2.0 is still below industry standards, and that it's not, as far as I'm concerned, 2.0 staffing really should be the bare minimum as far as what we're doing. So I think when we go out and we have mutual aid, to whether our cities or other agencies within the county, our neighbors, then we're a lot more beneficial to other agencies. So I don't have a problem with going 2.0 in all of our stations. I noticed that the Early Mart, the station refurb is from 5 years out. So assuming we're successful with CDBG, then that gets off the books, and hopefully in future CDBG funding cycles, we can get even additional to work on our needs for all of our various needs. I guess-
Absolutely. And with extrication equipment, we will look at Homeland Security grant monies and so on and so forth. We will do everything to try and defray what our bottom line is.
I guess my only question, and it's probably more for the CAO, is are we budgeted for, I know we already budgeted for some of these additions, but the full phase, or would that be, are we really looking for next fiscal year for some of the additional 2.0 that's proposed here?
Nothing has been proposed specifically as of yet. The approach has been to ask the chief and his department to come forward and to give us the comprehensive scope of the need, and then we try to figure it out. And this may be a good segue for me perhaps to give an update with regard to the budget. As a practical matter, there is anywhere between $5 to $6 million a year of general fund contribution to sustain the department. So this would be in addition to the general fund contribution. With regard to capital projects, and I would ask Mr. Hess maybe to add a comment with regard to this, what we are trying to do to soften or mitigate the fiscal impact is roll it into the capital improvement program so that the department is not really having to fund this type of operation. And he could add to that. The other observation I was going to make, and after John, perhaps council can address the issue of certificates of participation. As this committee well knows, we just completely paid off a long-term $100 million COP. There is availability to do that. However, I would like to caution the committee that we're considering perhaps a sizable pension obligation bond. We're considering perhaps a solar funding operation, and then perhaps a COP. Right now we have about $4 million in outstanding debt. It's a policy question whether this board wants to load, as a practical matter, this county with a lot of debt. But there is availability if we had to, and I'll let council respond, to use COPs to fund this kind of debt. But what I'm trying to do, working with Mr. Hess, is see if we can roll it into our annual capital improvement program so that we wouldn't have to go to debt. Council, would you like to perhaps respond to the debt first, and then John, the CIP?
Jeff Keown, Deputy County Counsel. You would have the opportunity to issue certificates of participation to pay for capital improvements for the fire department, station remodeling, new stations, various, again, equipment, primarily with long-term, assets. You wouldn't want to pay probably for year-to-year equipment that way, or certainly operating costs you don't want to pay for that way. But capital assets, certainly that could be done. Typically, the COPs are secured by your general fund, so the repayment is going to be a general fund cost as a long-term debt. So.
Yes, John Hess. Regarding the capital projects, the CIP that we have is an annual CIP, and it programs out 5 years worth of projects. Those projects are both a mix of projects that are in progress as well as prospective recommended projects, those projects that we believe are advisable based on current building conditions, future growth needs, things of that nature. So the current CIP that was brought before the board about 4 or 5 weeks ago included on the out years, years 3, 4, and 5, a lot of activity in support of the fire stations as well as sheriff substations. Presently, years 1 and 2 and even into 3, we have a large volume of existing projects, space, the 2 jails, property and evidence, and so on. As we are completing those projects, we'll have a lot more available resources, particularly the Millennium Fund, to address those substations and fire station projects. And through that process, also evaluate the needs as presented by the fire department here as well.
So if I may, as a practical matter, it looks like we can handle the capital projects and the equipment, but the challenge for the general fund is going to be the staffing moving forward.
So if the board was okay with even just the initial proposal of 2 staffing and the additional 4 stations, would we be looking at that for next fiscal year, or would that be more immediate?
It would be next fiscal year as per your presentation, right, Chief? Okay. I think for mid-year it's about 160,000, and then the 1.x million would be for the following fiscal year.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Thanks for the presentation, Chief.
Thank you for your time and
We
consideration.
appreciate it. Okay, next on the agenda is a report on public safety facilities financing options. Item A, Health and Human Services Agency Director with an update to the criminal justice, health, and mental health care services.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jason Britt. I'm the Health and Human Services Agency Director, and this is a follow-up report to a report we gave to you in August outlining some historical relationships the agencies had in terms of paying for criminal justice, mental health, and health care, and how the relationship and the financing is going to change with the board's approval and the sheriff's subsequent construction of the South County Detention Facility. I'll try to keep my comments to the 10 minutes we've been asked to, but this is a very complex and complicated story, so I'll try to do my best to talk you through the complexity. So again, just reminding the committee, this is our historical contract costs with Corizon as our contracted mental health and health vendor. This just shows you the upward trajectory of cost over the last 5 years. One thing that we did not show last meeting that we wanted to show today was the additional funding that the agency is having to expend on behalf of this contract. So the contract currently is $12 million and some change, but that does not include the $646,000 that the agency pays to monitor, to oversee this contract, to provide some funds for alcohol and drug services, for some contingencies to exceptions of treatment, and also the $194,000 that we're paying in current ISF charges for the infirmary and the space that we occupy at the jail. This does not include ISF charges or projected ISF charges for the South County facility, as we are still working through those numbers and trying to find out exactly what those costs. But this just gives you, so later in the presentation, we're going to talk about includes agency costs and exclude agency costs. So just knowing that when we say includes agency costs, these are the costs that we're talking about that's being included to give you a picture of the full cost of this contract and not just the contract in itself. And then I'm not sure what other dollars that the sheriff expends to also monitor the contract, monitor the contractor, so on and so forth. So I'm sure he expends quite a bit, as he has a lieutenant who does that. Again, this is just a reminder of the contract revenue that breaks down for our current contract. This does not include agency costs. This is just the $12 million contract that we're talking about today. So it's just a reminder that AB 109 commits $1 million. The agency commits 7.1, and the general fund currently still commits 3.8. The South County Detention Facility, as far as the information I have, still is scheduled to open in 2018. The sheriff has presented a 5-year phasing plan, which is what we've built our assumptions on in this presentation, which includes 510 total beds, including 16 beds for special needs housing and nine beds for health and mental health. So the assumptions we're going to work on with today's numbers as we go forward is going to be that the sheriff's plan does not significantly change, because I know things change, but if this is the assumption. The other assumption is that no new regulations or litigations emerge impacting jail health and health care in the next 5 years, which is probably unlikely, but we don't know what we don't know. SB 10 is also the bail reform bill that's been made into a 2-year bill that we've been watching very closely. And so we're going to assume if that passes, it will not reduce jail population, although I'm not sure if it passes in its current form, how it would not do that. And that is relevant because really the only way you reduce costs in this contract is reducing population. And the last assumption that we work on is that our healthcare vendor continues to be Corizon, because that is the quote we have received, and that's the only certainty that we have with these numbers. So looking at strictly just the cost breakdown for the increase of cost to the contract for the South County Jail, based on what we understand the sheriff's phasing plan to be, is kind of broken down here. I'm sorry the slide is kind of busy, but it's difficult to kind of drill down into this information. So year one, when they open, our understanding is they're going to open booking and 124 beds. So essentially, year one is what establishes our base contract. So there's a base level of staffing that has to occur by the Corizon contractor or healthcare contractor, whoever the name is, to operate and to take care of those numbers of inmates. So our base estimated cost is basically $3.5 million. So that's for the 124 inmates and for the 24-hour booking operation that the sheriff will operate there, because in booking, there has to be an RN providing an assessment for every person who comes in before they can get housed in the jail. So that has to be paid for and has to be reflected in those costs. And you can stop me at any time with questions. Year two, they go to open another 120 beds, the 9 outpatient housing beds, and close 100 beds at main jail. So the net effect of that is $206,000. So but that's added to the 3.5. So it's not like our costs went down to 206. This is a cascading, compounding problem. So it kind of nets out. There's some savings at main jail because we've got 100 people moving to Porterville and shifting of some resources. So we kind of net that out at about $206,000. In year three, they open another 130 beds and 16 beds at transitional housing and close 172 beds at main jail. Some of the numbers don't really add up, but that's the plan. So we're expecting that to actually save some money in that year, because we'll no longer have to provide resources to the main jail, as that will be sort of idled and there won't be any inmates there, and we'll be now taking care of them in Porterville at the new jail. Year 21, 22, we sort of think things will be status quo. We don't see any real big changes, as there's not a lot of movement other than the MCF facility, which, as we understand it, will be sort of a 1-for-1 swap, so there wouldn't be much changes there. And then phase 5, where would they open the remaining 120 beds, we would expect the cost to increase a little over $1 million on an annual basis, so that you would then have really about a $6.6 million cost in health and mental health for a fully staffed, fully run South County detention facility.
Jason, where does the new SB or AB 1022 facility in the North County, where does that fit in here?
That's the phase 5. That's the MC of the men's correctional facility. So the way we understand it in our conversations with the sheriff is that's being considered a 1-to-1 swap. So we already have people at the men's facility now,
Okay.
and they're just going to move them to the new facility. So there would not be an increase in population.
Okay, all right.
So that's why you see no changes. So even though there'll be a new building, there's going to be the same number of inmates.
Okay.
Does that help?
Works for me. Thanks.
Yeah. So the good news is our last presentation, we had a $9.6 million annual cost estimated for you. So we've got that to, at the end of the 5 years, somewhere around 6.6. But that's on an annual basis. So this is not a one-time cost. This is not. So, and then, So really, after completely opening the South County Detention Facility and closing main jail, the sheriff would have added about 250 beds to the population. So going from here forward in this presentation, it's very difficult just to talk about Porterville because this is a contract for entire county services. So I apologize for the sort of the shift in the numbers and how we start looking at this, but it doesn't really, I think, serve us or give us a really clear picture of the true costs if we're just going to talk about Porterville. We kind of know, okay, Porterville is going to be probably around $6 or $7 million annually, but how does this then sort of really roll up into the whole contract? So we've given you a 5-year cost estimate based on our current contract and the new business that we'll be picking up in Porterville. And these numbers do include a 3% annual escalator because there's typically either a 3% or a CPI increase. So since we don't know what the CPI is year to year, we sort of just use 3%. And this does not include the new ISF charges that the agency may incur in Porterville. As I previously stated, we're still working through those numbers. So essentially what you see here, what's reflected here, is that by the end of the opening of Phase 5, the entire Porterville jail, with all of our jail facilities being at Bob Wiley, pretrial, and at South County, we're looking at a $19.4 million contract for health and mental health. So part of our presentation last time was to bring back a couple scenarios of how this would impact the county and how the agency could leverage their trust funds to assist the county with a smoothing period. And so these are going to be the scenarios we walk through. So we have 3 scenarios. I apologize for all the numbers, but there just wasn't really a better way to do it. We wrestled with it. So the first scenario, and I'll show you, one scenario will be A and one will be B. But the only difference is this one, A's do not include the agency's cost, just pure the contract. And then the B's will just show you what the full cost is with the agency's cost, just for transparency and understanding the full cost of the project, of the contract. So in this slide, what we're showing here in scenario 1A is if the county was just to allocate 100% additional general fund to the increased costs over the next 5 years to cover the South County facilities, this is what it would look like. Beginning in 2018 and 19, the general fund would have to add $3.8 million to the agency's budget to cover these expenses. The subsequent year would be 4.5, and then it goes, kind of stays at 4.5 for 2020. In 2021, 22, that goes up to $5 million. And then at the end of 2020, or at the beginning of 2022, for the 22-23 fiscal year, it would be 6.6. So that just kind of shows that. Again, this is the same table. It does not show an increase to the annual, the general fund, because we are not asking the county to pay the agency costs. This would just be only the contract costs, but we wanted to make sure the agency's costs were reflected in any kind of discussion.
So how does that get picked up?
We pick it up through our health realignment and mental health realignment revenue streams, just like we do today. So we'll continue doing that unless there's a change in direction from the county. So I just want to be clear, though, that the only thing that changes in the B scenario on this slide is the health and mental health realignment numbers, not the county's contribution. Again, sorry for it being complicated, but we wanted to be transparent in our numbers. Scenario 2A is where HSA could be directed to cover 100% of the increased costs, and by leveraging our trust fund dollars and reducing services. And of course, all this shows is just moving it to the HSA column, and we're picking up the same exact cost that we talked about in the previous slide. And again, here it's the same thing, it's just showing the increase in agency costs. The important thing is that these numbers don't really change. So this is really what the numbers we need to talk about, whether it's the county general fund, HHSA, et cetera. So if HSA was to be directed to pick up all of the costs, increased costs of these contracts for the next 5 years, leveraging our trust funds, because if you recall, I mentioned to you that the agency is fairly at its limit for realignment funding to contribute to this program, that the funding streams are just not there. And with the pressures of IHSS and many other things coming down the pike, these revenue streams are not going to grow. A lot of our trust fund balance comes from growth, because we don't budget growth because it's not certain. So when growth comes in, if we get it, then we put it away in the trust fund, because it's not prudent to budget growth and then spend money that you're not expecting. So I've laid out 2 trust analysis here that we'll go through, but the first thing that I want to do is I want to address how we use our mental health and health trust, realignment trusts in the agency. One is it helps us to weather economic downturns. We are seeing 8 years of economic expansion. The crash will come. And revenue realignment is tied to sales tax and VLF. So when the recession comes and people start losing jobs and et cetera, which I hope doesn't happen, but if we look at history, that's what happens. Sales tax goes down, car licensing goes down, therefore revenue streams go down. So we use that to weather those downturns, particularly how we adjust our staffing, because as you know, with the county HR processes, it can take you up to 6 months to reduce your workforce. The second thing is we pay audit exceptions. So we get audited on our programs from the state, and sometimes we have exceptions and we have to pay money back, and we pay those monies back through these trust funds. Also, unexpected one-time costs. Sometimes we have that one client or one patient that is gravely ill that costs us $1 million, $500,000. We have an individual in the jail today who's probably going to cost us $100,000 a month if we don't get him out soon, as an exception for treatment, because that's what we use these monies for. Also, unexpected changes that the state and feds do to us midstream. That does happen, and we use that to weather those until we can make adjustments. And probably the most important is we do not use trust funds for known ongoing cost. So these funds are not leveraged for known ongoing costs. So moving to our mental health trust sort of snapshot that we put up there, if we were to pay 100% of the mental health and health costs of the new contract in the next 5 years, we would essentially use all of our mental health trust fund by the end of the year 2021. So there would be no more, we would be in a deficit position beyond that year. And again, I have to also say that this is using our mild recession analysis. We look at 4 different modeling strategies in the agency, one a moderate growth, one a mild recession, and we've used the mild recession model here because, again, we're expecting that mild recession to increase, to come at some point. We felt that was kind of in the middle of the road.
Jason, how long did it take to get that $8.8 million in the trust fund, to build that up?
Probably 10 years for mental health. Because I think the last time we had 0 trust fund balances was 2008, was in 2008. And we learned a lesson in that downturn is we didn't have as much savings then, and I think it caused a lot of we had to cut much deeper and lay off a lot more staff than we had anticipated. Public health trust, same kind of scenario. They have a little bigger trust because the revenue, the growth realignment for some previous years have come in stronger than expected. We've also benefited from some increased revenue from the Affordable Care Act, which may or may not continue depending on what happens at the federal level. And we've also benefited from not having anybody on our Tulare County Medical Services Program, which is our Welfare and Institutions Code 13,000 mandate to care for indigent people, because we've been able to put them on ACA programs. If that goes away and we have to go back to using our WIC 13,000 program, we would expect to leverage a big portion of this trust to pay for those medical costs. But despite all of that, if we were to pay 100% of the costs of the South County increases, public health would be at its maximum by the end of 2022. And of course, we're not expecting any growth realignment here because, again, everything's going to the IHSS deal, the covered gut. So scenario 3 is kind of where we kind of like, let's meet in the middle kind of scenario. And this would be if the county and HSA could share in the cost of these increases, kind of use that as a smoothing period for the county so that we could catch up. Hopefully assessed evaluation grows, economic development grows, things grow, we have whatever, population reduces, the world catches up to us. And so it's not such a big hit to the general fund. And this is a way we could leverage our trust funds to assist the county to make that up. And so in this scenario, you would see what we're kind of proposing, and of course this is always open to negotiation, we just had to put a proposal out there, was that in the first year we would sort of 50-50 it. You know, you pay 1.9, we pay 1.9. And then we would decrease our share 25% annually until the end of year 5. Then the county would be picking up 100% of the increased cost to jail, medical, and mental health care. Notice the agency would still continue to contribute the levels of health and mental health realignment. AB 109, I can't speak for that, but we're going to assume they will continue with their $1 million. And we would still continue with the $3.8 million general fund we have today. So that's kind of the, a discussion point of where we could use some of our trust funds to help smooth the increases in costs for the county. And again, 3B just shows the same thing, just shows that our health realignment, mental health realignment is higher because we're paying the agency costs for contract administrations.
Jason, a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
Has the county's general fund contribution to this, has that remained stagnant over the last 5 years or so, the $3.85 million?
So that's a good question. The general fund contribution to jail medical has been fairly low until 2014. In 2014 is when the CAO at that time increased our general fund contribution by $3.8 million because, as you recall in my first presentation, we used to fund this out of the indigent healthcare funds that got redirected to the state via AB 85 in 2014. So that 3.8 has only been coming to the agency since 2014.
So that 3.8 has been the same, though? Since
it has been the same. And so in this scenario, you would have the 3.8 plus the 1.9 coming to the agency to cover the first year, and so on and so on. So this would be an additional general fund allocation.
So assuming that you utilize the trust funds in the way that it's outlined, subtracting the almost $6 million, does that put you in a better or worse situation than the agency was in before the last recession?
Well, I think for health, we are in a better position. Mental health continues to be volatile and always volatile because just the cost of services. You know, the more people we hospitalize, the more, et cetera. We are in a better place overall if the next recession was to hit, because when the crash of 2007-8 occurred, I believe, I'm stretching by memory and I wasn't as involved in the discussions, but we didn't have any trust funds. So we laid off hundreds of people. Supervisor Vanderbilt probably remembers those days. So irregardless of which way the county chooses to go, minus the 100% of the agency pays for the trust funds, we're still going to be in a better place for the next downturn. We just felt that I put this forward because I just felt like it was the right thing to do, and it helps the county and it helps us. And as we partner in this going forward, and as we grapple with these costs and how we contain these costs and how we pay for these costs, it is going to have to be a shared conversation. So the last thing I wanted to touch on, which you all have, is the jail research report that I sent to you all. And again, my intention of sending you that was just to highlight that we are not the only ones grappling with this issue, that jail costs for incarceration are really a nationwide concern. And that to kind of give, I think, some credence to what our CAO and our Deputy CAO Amanza has been doing, which is really trying to look at other agencies' budgets to really get to the true cost of the program. And this is what that report bears out. So I think that resonated with us as to that's a good road to go down. And also, most of the respondents indicated that nearly all jurisdictions paid more than 85% of jail costs with county general fund. We also did our own. We're also doing our own survey within California. We've only been able to get information from 20 counties, contracted counties, but out of the 20 contracted counties, only 6 use realignment funds of any kind, and 12 of the 20 contract counties, the sheriff manages the contract. And so I just wanted to just provide that as more information. And then lastly, what's not on this slide is that the research report concluded that the only way to really significantly impact decreasing jail costs was to decrease population. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions or take any comment.
Committee members, first, I want to thank you, Jason, and your team for bringing this report forward. It was comprehensive, and what I especially want to thank you for is the scenario analysis, whereby you gave this committee options, which include utilization of other financing sources to try to soften the impact as we move forward. I think that's excellent. Now, as I mentioned to you, and I just want to mention to the committee, I believe tomorrow or this week when we have our regularly scheduled meeting, we'll be discussing in general other budgetary impacts looking ahead to HHSA, and perhaps you can bring that forward in December, because it's not only this program inaugurated by HHSA that will have future general fund impacts moving forward. So in December, you'll get the picture of other programs that may need general fund support. So thank you again.
Well, I thank you for the report, Jason. I think that it's there's probably not many counties up and down the state doing this level of analysis, projecting forward what these costs are going to look like. But I commend you and commend the CAO side for really encouraging this and looking at this, because this is sobering. It's daunting. We talk about these increased costs that are going to come from the general fund. Where does this money come from? We have to strategically plan and position ourselves to pay for these costs that are coming, and to create discretionary revenues, because I don't think the assessor's office is going to be very happy if we take all the money from his spot. Where's Roland at when you need him, right? Come on, Tim. I just something's going to have to give. I think that the state's going to have to get creative and what they're doing and how they're funding their realignment of justice responsibilities from the state level to the local level. They've sure aligned. They've sure realigned a lot of responsibility with not an adequate amount of funding to go along with that responsibility. Tulare County is in such a strong financial position, but you look at what's coming, and it's going to be tough to stay in that spot. And if we are having this potential downturn coming with these increasing costs. What are other counties doing that are already in a tough position? I can't even imagine what Kern County is going to do. I mean, they can barely survive when you're not even talking about these costs, just based on their tax revenue and the economic downturns they've seen in the energy industry. So it gets really scary, but we have to be creative in coming up with ways to create new revenues for this county that we can use on a discretionary basis. And looking back to when the board purchased the Cigna building, what a prime example. We're meeting a facility need that we have, but also generating funds at the same time that we can use discretionarily going forward. So, keep your thinking cap on and help come up with new ways, because we're going to need them.
Well, we certainly do grapple with these all the time, and this is, one of the probably the contract I've stayed the most involved in, engaged in the agency, because it is the largest contract, not only for the agency, well, probably not for the agency, but for the county, and it involves a county partnership as well. And I think you're right, Supervisor, that many jurisdictions are grappling with this. I think, unfortunately, from the state standpoint, I think bail reform is their answer, which reduces your population. I don't know, I can't prognosticate what this legislature is going to do, but I can almost be certain that if they pass SB 10 in its form today, you're going to have a very small jail population.
And the jail populations may get smaller, but does that mean our communities get safer? Absolutely
that's
not.
Another philosophical discussion.
One other point that I did want to make too. A point that was made earlier was just talking about the non-explicit costs, but the internal costs of this Horizon contract. And we're talking about $700,000 in your shop. I don't even want to guess what's going to be the cost that's incurred in the sheriff's shop from basically performing contract oversight by two separate departments. Maybe something we need to look at from the CAO is looking at how do we get to one contract oversight body and reduce the redundancy and costs. Having one point person, whether it's in the CAO's office or it's in HHSA or it's in the sheriff's department, we've got to have one go-to person or one go-to body that's the contract oversight authority, so that we don't have to have two departments incurring these costs, and hopefully we can save something there.
I'd just like to add that I like the approach of having balance where it's not completely on the agency and it's not completely on the general fund, that we have some type of balance. But, I think it's important that we also have the department that's going to have the most benefit out of this, the sheriff's department, needs to have some skin in the game too. And so I think that they need to look to find a help to make sure that they're putting their efforts to help with that effort as well, that all three are really working to try and get these costs under line.
Okay, great. Any additional comments, questions from committee members, members of the public? Okay, seeing none, thank you for that report. Very thorough, Jason. Okay, next we're going to move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is a report on the reorganization of general services and capital projects. Deputy County Administrative John Hess.
I'll keep it brief because I'll talk fast.
Mr. Four-Story.
Yes, that's right. All right. Good morning, John Hess, Deputy CEO, General Services Capital Projects. This is a presentation regarding the General Services Agency organizational proposal. We'll start with some departmental background regarding the organizational history of the department, show some research and analysis regarding other counties, how they manage their business model of this particular function, the internal comparison of the department compared to other county departments in Tulare County, how that's tied to historic county organizational growth, and then look at the proposal overview itself, conclude with next steps. So the proposal is to establish a general services agency as a standalone independent county department. It would be comprised of a variety of different functions, sort of multidisciplinary functions. In general services, historically the general services department includes custodial, fleet, property management, print, mail, copiers, courier, and utilities were left off the list there. Capital projects and facilities includes capital and facilities, which are the construction and the maintenance of county buildings. Parks and recreation are parks, grounds, which is landscaping of county-owned facilities different than the parks and recreation activities, as well as managing our multiple museums. Administrative support is provided by the analyst team, our fiscal division, and our clerical support. So in essence, these are the internal county services of Tulare County. Our primary customers and clients are internal county departments. We do have a public interface with respect to the Parks Department, which is our primary public exposure. Otherwise, it's almost exclusively all county clients. Our activities are, again, multidisciplinary, but they do include the oversight of county buildings through utilities, custodial, facilities, capital projects, and so on, as well as grounds. We have as well many large construction projects on our plate right now and probably for the next couple of years to come. As a result, the scope and size of the department is such that it's one of the top 5 or 10 largest county departments, and there's more info on that in a bit. So General Services was embedded in the County Administrative Office in 2010, pulled out of RMA. Prior to being an RMA, it was a standalone department in and of itself, which has historically, again, included property, parks and rec, grounds, custodial, fleet, print and mail, and utilities. Capital projects and facilities has been, it was in the CO's office, then it was a standalone department in 2014, and then returned back in 2015, where it's been merged since then. Earlier this year, I brought forth an organizational request to the Board of Supervisors to add one General Services Manager position, which was approved, and that individual, Laura Silva, has been in that position for the last 6 or 7 months and doing a great job, especially with our property management activities. So looking at other counties and what business model they use with respect to these functions, I collected the both not only our regional partners, but also those counties that are of a similar size. And the wisdom behind that is internal services are a function of the organizational size, the size of the county, which itself is a function of the population they're serving. So that's kind of the wisdom behind that. As you can see, the only two entities not utilizing a general services agency are Tulare and Merced. Merced utilizes multiple county departments for their internal services. They're about half our size, and so perhaps it's more of an economy of scale that makes sense for them there. So we stand alone there as the only ones not utilizing a general services agency model. So internally within the county, the proposed department would be the 7th largest department by number of employees at 160, just under child support, out of 24 total county departments. Financially, it would be the 3rd largest at $108 million. It would be it would be a little bit larger than Sheriff and just under RMA for financial responsibility. So county historical growth is important also to look at in the sense that General Services Capital Projects has continued to grow over the past 8 years while it's been in the CAO's office. It, in its essence, as mentioned, it provides services to county customers. Therefore, as the county grows, so does the internal services. Those grow as a function of the county's growth itself. Some of the activities that have themselves necessitated that growth, which we've talked about elsewhere this morning, are the 2 detention facilities being constructed, the acquisition of the Tulare Acres Professional Center, and the repossession of the Office of Education buildings back into the county's responsibility. Those have all necessitated additional facilities, custodial, and utilities responsibilities for the county. So those are sort of the reasons, outlining the reasons that lead to the recommendation of establishing the General Services Agency. It would combine, in essence, several similarly functioning departments into one agency, which is consistent with the county's past practices as well as current organizational performance goals and objectives. It would increase efficiency and improve services for internal county customers. Again, it would constitute one of the larger county operations. HHSA and RMA are probably the 2 best past examples of a multidisciplinary department formed to address a variety of different functions for organizational improvement purposes. One of the added benefits, and I added this on this slide, is it would create a permanent and strategic department management structure. The department, as evidenced earlier, has gone through a variety of different changes over the years, and many of the managers and employees that have been with the department over the 10, 15-year window, let's say, have experienced a variety of different shifts and reorganization. This would allow some level of stability to those individuals going forward. So the new position that would be recommended would be a General Services Agency Director, reallocating the Assistant Director position, which was allocated previously and was filled previously. And so the 5 functional areas would look like this: general services, capital, fiscal, administrative, and parks and recreation, which is very similar to how it's organized presently. On a org chart, this is what it would look like there as a proposal, with the director and assistant director, department secretary, and the 5 functional areas that we just showed. Looking at the fiscal impacts, at this stage, there appear to be no fiscal impacts to the general funds. Costs of the positions would be absorbed through the current revenue streams without having to increase any sort of rates, without having to generate any additional rate revenues. They would be covered through those existing revenue streams, and there would be position savings as well to offset any additional costs that would be generated from this activity. Finally, from a strategic management system perspective, this would allow the department to begin the strategic planning process of looking at the mission, vision, and value of the departments. What makes the department, what's its essential requirement, what does it want to do as its primary value. Also an opportunity to look at the strengths and weaknesses of the department, as well as challenges and opportunities that may be in the future. For example, and this is the one that I do believe is probably one of the bigger challenges that would need to be addressed going forward, and particularly in a financial capacity, is the ISF cash flow. The ISF cash flow is very important. It's actually state regulated to have a 60-day amount of cash on hand for all the ISFs. And the ISF rates have many times lagged as we've grown out of the recession. The rates were increased as the cost increased. They were increased several years later. So we played catch up, as well as the state controller's office came in a couple years ago, perhaps last year, and had us refund a lot of our cash back out to departments. So we've been having some narrow cash issues over the last year or so. And that's something that nothing to be alarmed about, but would be an area to be addressed in the coming years. So, in essence, the recommendation is to organize and establish the Tulare County General Services Agency, create a General Services Agency Director, allocate one position, and reallocate one existing Assistant General Services Director position. And with that, the recommended next steps would be, with comments and approval or direction this morning, would be to bring it back to the Board of Supervisors, perhaps by the end of this month or early next month for consideration.
So a question that I have, John, is when you looked at other jurisdictions, comparable counties, and their general services department, was the department similarly comprised as the one that you're proposing? Meaning, are we covering all departments that are typically included in the general services department that you see in other counties?
Yes, and then there are other counties who add additional functions into the General Services Agency that are also of an essential internal service nature.
Because to me, when I see this and the list of departments that you're proposing to include within this, I would think purchasing would also be another department that would be a perfect fit within a General Services Agency because of its internal service nature.
Correct, and actually, incidentally, that was a matter that I was looking at as well when I was doing that research, and every one of those others had purchasing in that General Services Agency structure.
To me, I mean, I would like to see this come before the Board of Supervisors sooner rather than later. So as quickly as you can get this to the board would be great. And given that purchasing has been proposed or is allocated to other general services departments that you have researched, I would look at including purchasing in this as well, in what you present to the Board of Supervisors.
Very good.
Just some comments. I think that the budget is probably a bit inflated based on the capital projects that we're doing in regards to jails. So
very much so. Much larger than normal.
But I do agree with the fact that there's a certain level of complexity, as there's a lot of different departments doing vastly different tasks and ideas. So I don't necessarily have a problem with this. I just want to make sure that I think it's important, and this isn't necessarily for you, but for all department heads, that if we're talking about purchasing, then I would caution as far as the span of control for the agency director, and how many direct reports that director would have that needs to be taken into consideration, as well as just the ability to have a good, strong assistant to be able to help with the tasks. I know you're currently capital projects is very much high profile, not just for the board but for other departments, as you're touching a lot of different departments, and I don't have to tell you, they're all behind you. They all have their needs, and they want it now. And so, I would just, I just say that having a strong individual that can be able to fill that assistant role for the agency director is critical to make sure that the work still continues to get done, that we're able to provide for that, and in addition to that, I think the other tasks, although it's smaller in nature, the parks is very much high profile, not just from the board perspective but from the public's perspective. So that's just those are my feedbacks, my comments.
And those really are
overall. I have no issue with this.
Those are our two primary areas of attention right now. Really tend to be parks, capital, and property to kind of a third level. Those are our three major activities right now.
Council, any comments? No. All right. Well, thank you very much. Any public comments related to this item? Okay, seeing none, we will continue on with the agenda and take up item number 6, which is a report on the Strategic Management System Strategic Business Plan Update.
Okay, I can do this. I can do this very briefly. The primary reason why this report is brought to this committee is to give the new supervisor an opportunity for any comments. A bit of background. During 2016, when Mr. Ennis was the chair, he requested that the strategic management plan be updated. That had been done in December 2016. In 2017, we had 2 new supervisors. So I guess the general question, because I don't need to go through this presentation per se, but if there are any questions or comments that perhaps Mr. Crocker may have, I'd be delighted to respond to them or take them into account moving forward.
Well, I think just some general comments I think this is a great approach, and it's very specified to economic development. But when I think about strategic management, I guess I'm thinking about the county from a broader standpoint. With all agencies and economic development, even though it's an integral part as far as getting revenues, increasing revenues, and helping us for all of our needs, I think this is really a lot more specific, and so I would I guess encourage is perhaps being somewhat separate, and yet knowing that they're connected, because without the economic development, we want be able to have the revenues necessary to provide the services that our communities demand. And then the other point that I think that it may not be spelled out here, but when we look at a business model, I think a lot of times there's an assumption that there's some type of revenue, and when we look at the items that come before the board, there's a strong emphasis on net county cost. And while I think that's important, and we absolutely have to be fiscally prudent with our dollars, I also know that not every county department is a revenue generator, and we as an obligation, there are certain duties and tasks that we perform as a county that we may have the opportunity to generate revenue, but I don't know that that's necessarily the role that we should be moving towards as far as trying to generate revenue at all costs and expense. So I think there needs to be a little bit of a balance there, just knowing that when there are opportunities and where it makes sense, that we have outside revenues, whether it's fines or fees or some other mechanism to generate revenues, then we encourage that, but also having that understanding that not all departments are going to be able to fulfill those duties. And so that's that's just like I said, I don't think that there was anything specifically outlined in there, but just something to take into consideration as we do that. Lastly, I know that I appreciate this presentation, but and without conferring with her, I have not. But just knowing the other colleague, Supervisor Shuckley, and being also new to the board, I think that she would, if you haven't already, appreciate some type of presentation along this lines. That's it.
Thank you. If I may just briefly respond. First, Mr. Krog, your points are very well taken. Maybe just a bit of background in terms of the genesis of this concept. Several years ago, my predecessor and I discussed the issue of net county cost in this sense, recognizing fully well that there are a number of departments that don't have that income or revenue generating capability. What do you do with the growth in expenditures and you have stagnant growth with regard to revenues? How can we artificially increase the revenue pie in order to support those increases in budget growth for departments for which there isn't corresponding revenue? That's how this concept started. And then RMA was selected as the experimental agency to see if the strategic management, economic development concept could work, because there's a great deal of similarity with regard to those concepts. And over a number of years, by doing this, you can see the growth in revenue. Next year, if we're successful, during the last 5 years, there will be $1 billion in new economic growth from building permits alone in the unincorporated area. So it did work. It is being applied to the other departments, but any new concept that's transformational in nature should be, in my view, applied incrementally and methodically and not drastically. And every month at the department head meetings and at our budget presentations, the concept of sustainability is being utilized, which is, are there any revenue generating opportunities? We want them to think. We want them to be creative. If they can, and they want to increase their structural budget, which is the ongoing expenditures that year after year get repeated, are you looking at your internal operations to see if you still need to spend everything you're spending? And I think you mentioned that today with regard to South County. Another department should be looking at their budget to see if there's any cost savings that could be transferred. So this concept is being communicated. Now, the final point is this. We recognize that all departments can't do it because we are a public organization, not a private organization. So the business model, and I'll refine that concept, is business model with a caveat, in the sense that those departments that need to serve the public interest, for which there is not a corresponding capability to increase revenue, should do the best they can, but there is no absolute obligation that they must do that in order to sustain. But this perhaps goes to what the chairman raised in his comments. As we move forward, if we are not continuing to grow at a good 4.5% clip of assessed valuation, i.e. we stagnate or decline, something's got to give with the budget. In other words, there's going to be trade-offs. Meaning, if some departments are going to be the beneficiary of increased net county cost, other departments may have to yield in the sense that their targets are going to be reduced if we don't have a corresponding increase in revenue. That's perhaps the underlying message of this committee. Looking ahead, we have huge expenditures, and if our revenue growth doesn't keep up with the expenditures, then there are going to have to be departmental trade-offs. So thank you very much. I'll refine the message to incorporate your comments, and Supervisor Shuckley does have all these materials, and I'll have a conversation with her. So thank you very much.
Any further questions or strategic comments? Nope. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that, going over that. Next, we're going to take up item 7, which is comments and next steps. I think that our next meeting will be particularly focused on retirement. And that meeting date is
November 14th at 10 a.m.
Okay.
And looking ahead, I believe at the next meeting we'll have retirement and also an introduction to the, from RMA, how to address infrastructure in the water and wastewater arena in particular.
Okay. Any additional comments or questions from members of the public? Other departments that want to be on the agenda? Just kidding. All right.
Let's see who's not here.
We will now move on to sheriff's department's not here. Let's look into them even further.
Shocking.
We'll move on to Supervisor Crocker's favorite item on the agenda. That's item 8, adjournment. Thank you everyone for attending today's meeting. The meeting is adjourned. We will see you again on November 14th at 10.